Yeah! Yippee-ki-yay, my friends! Hello, my friends! My name is Artur and I am an Estonian YouTuber. We are going to continue on resource wars today. Extra Credits has a series where they talk about what happened behind the scenes in World War II. Why different powers did what they did, what motivated them, and the most common thing is resources. And I want to know to the last detail what happened on that scene. But before we go on to that, there is some very important announcement. Actually, it's not an announcement, it's a thank you message. It's a serious thank you message because my Shopify store has been saved. Oh, mama! I want to now say a thank you and do a thank you dance to these people who bought the mug and saved my Shopify store. Julia Monroe. Thank you, Julia, for buying the mug. Aja Russell. Thank you, Aja, for buying the mug. Dwayne George. George, you saved the store. Justin Bear. That was my French dance. Thank you, Justin. Peyton Sharon. Thank you, Peyton, for saving the store. Cheers to you. That's not it. There is more. John Stinson. Thanks, John, for saving the store. Anna Christiansen. Thank you to all of you who bought the mug of the gods and drink tea like gods up in the Mount Olympus right now. You saved my Shopify store. If you want to drink tea like gods on the Mount Olympus, then order this mug. It's not expensive. Link is in the description below, and you will help the Shopify store to be up. My cat is destroying everything again. Let's go on. Let's go on with the video.
To understand the strategic decisions of the Second World War, you have to understand the struggle for resources that underpinned it. All wars to some extent are about resources, but this war was like no other conflict in history. To power the vast engine of war, to feed the complex machine that churned out tanks and bombs, trucks and ships, that kept millions of men fed, armed, and clothed in the field, the combatants of World War II needed a diversity and a quantity of natural resources heretofore unconsidered in the annals of military planning. And everybody knew that if they didn't get those resources, it would just be a matter of time before the all-consuming engine of battle ground to a halt. It was this fear that drove the Axis planning throughout much of the war. If we look at the Allies, we see an unimaginable wealth of resources. There were the oil and coal fields of Russia, the vast farmland, minerals, and refineries of the United States, and the far-flung empires of France and Britain, which could draw in exotic resources from across the globe.
I mean, yeah, if you now look at it, if you analyze it, Axis power's only motivation was to get the resources, because in the long run, it was impossible to win against the world. You don't have the resources. That's why I guess they wanted to penetrate deep into Ukrainian and Caucasus areas to get the oil fields, and then to knock Russia out of the picture as soon as possible, in the Soviet Union I mean, and then focus on the West. Well, it didn't go so easy with the Soviet Union. Also, they lost the Caucasus oil fields, also they lost the oil fields in Africa, so if you're out of oil, your tanks are not moving. If your tanks are not moving, Hans, we are in trouble.
Now compare that to the Axis, with the small island nation of Japan and the largely landlocked and non-colonial powers of Germany and Italy. The Allies could fuel the war on resources they already had. If the Axis was going to last at all, they needed to make up for what they lacked in war gains. And this dictated early policy. The Nazis knew they were going to lose their supplies of cobalt, copper, and most importantly, oil as soon as the war began in earnest, for they had imported most of those materials from their soon-to-be enemies, so they needed to find an alternative. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with the Soviet Union not only assured that the Germans wouldn't have to fight a two-front war, but also laid out in great detail a trade agreement that would have the USSR provide Germany with the supplies of those resources it would need to prosecute the war. Next,
okay, that I didn't actually know. We studied Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in like 4th grade, I think. It was one of the first things we studied in history, because it's Estonia, we have to study those things. And I didn't actually know that the resources were so important, but it makes so much sense. Why the hell did he attack Soviet Union? Why? You had your resources, your iron, everything was imported from Soviet Union. Trains and millions of tons of everything. It doesn't make any sense to attack them. Of course, for that argument, Soviet Union, Stalin had plans to attack first, but they were too late, and so they were attacked. But the war would have happened anyway. Axis powers would have had much more opportunity if the Ribbentrop Pact actually held out to the end of the war, which the end would be much more different, I think.
The German planners had to tackle their lack of aluminum and iron, and this served as part of the impetus for the invasion of Norway. Not only would Norway serve as an excellent location for aluminum production, but it secured German access to Sweden, which is where the vast bulk of their iron imports came from. But the Germans would also need food if they were going to feed and field an army of millions, and France served as one of the most fertile regions in Europe. With a rapid conquest of France, Germany could also hope to secure strategic reserves that would buy them some time to pin down the other resources they...
Gizu. My cat is destroying everything. Destroys everything.
They were lacking. And so there's the first 2 years of the war. Other concerns certainly factored into the strategic decision-making, but step by step, throughout the early war, you can follow the need to shore up the resources the German economy lacked. But even after the massive German expansion of 1940, this left German planners with one great concern: oil. Even after Nazi efforts to support fascists in Romania...
Blur these words! I cannot even say the D word. I can't say the N and the D word. Damn it.
Brought the Romanian oil fields under their control, the German war machine was consuming about 25% more oil than even the expanded could produce. Month after month, this shortfall was being made up for by shipments from the USSR, but planners and the leadership lived in a state of continual paranoia where the looming and perhaps quite real possibility of Stalin simply cutting off oil shipments would spell an end to the Reich. And this is where the resource war and the terrible ideology of the merge. While there were a number of military men who suggested that the fascist war machine should break through North Africa and come to possess the oil fields of the Middle East, with his need for Lebensraum, his hatred of the Slavs and the Jews, and his foundational fear of communism, instead decided that the armies would move east into the heart of the Soviet Union and take possession of the Soviet oil fields. When this enormous effort stalled out, there were some desperate attempts to turn south and pick up oil fields closer to the Middle East, but by then it was too late. Germany had used most of its reserves pushing into Russia, and as a result would suffer shortages for the rest of the war.
Yeah, the Eastern Front was an endless pit. It just ate up everything they had. All of the power, the manpower, the industrial power, oil, everything went to the Eastern Front. Nothing was left for the West. And it vandalized the Axis armies. It was a big mistake. It was a wrong country to attack.
Japan faced a similar dilemma, but was perhaps in yet more dire straits, because the overwhelming majority of its trade before now had been with one single partner, the United States. Most Japanese planners recognized this deficiency, but also believed that any expansion in the Pacific would almost certainly draw them into conflict with the U.S. This led directly to a strategy that involved knocking the U.S. out of the war as quickly as possible. But it also led to two other strategies for the coming conflict, a set of strategies that would divide the Japanese forces. The army favored what is known as Hokushin-ron, or the Northern Expansion Doctrine, which called for a push through China into the resource-rich country of Siberia. The central idea was that the army could simultaneously bring the majority of raw materials that their economy needed under Japanese control and cripple the Soviet Union's ability to prosecute a war against Japan. The Navy, on the other hand, advocated Nanshin-ron, or Southern Expansion Doctrine, which proposed sweeping up the islands in the South Pacific to solve Japan's economic shortfalls. And both of these doctrines would play a huge part in how the Japanese prosecuted the war. In the outset of the war, with the invasion of China, we see the beginning of the implementation of the Northern Expansion Doctrine. But though little talked about in the history of World War II, this approach ground to a halt when the Japanese tried to push up through Mongolia and were turned back by the Soviets at the battles of Khalkhin Gol. Over 100,000 men fought an undeclared war there, and at its end, the Japanese army was forced to abandon its dreams of Siberian conquest, which left the...
Damn, I didn't know there was a war in Mongolia against Japanese. I guess the Mongols still have their ancient power of Genghis Khan beating back the Japanese. I listen to the band of The Who a lot, and I'm sure a lot of you, most of you know the band. They're really famous now in the world, but they do folk metal, folk rock, or from Mongolia it's folk rock. It's like metal from Estonia. It's really cool. I love this stuff. It's original, it's from the ancient culture, it's directly to my soul. Listen to it. The Who.
Their navy ascendant and free to push the doctrine that would win it the most prestige. And thus began Japan's rapid expansion into the Pacific. The idea was to strip the European nations already beleaguered by the war in the West of all of their colonial possessions in Asia. And this became an utter necessity because by this point the United States, Britain, China, and the Dutch government in exile, who controlled the all-important Dutch East Indies, had put an embargo on Japan, denying it nearly 80% of its oil. And though this empire was rolled back and finally shattered over the course of the coming years, it does lead me to one last thing I wanted to talk about. You see, as the Japanese expanded in the Pacific, they denied the Allies one key war material: rubber. 90% of the world's rubber production came from the territory overrun by the Japanese. So what did the Allies do? Left with no alternative, they synthesized rubber. At the beginning of the Second World War, only 0.4% of America's rubber was synthetic, but by the end, refineries dotted America, and techniques for synthesizing rubber had been established that underpin how we do it to this day. And even now, with no war or great international crisis, more of the world's rubber is synthesized than harvested. And this may seem like a small thing, but it tells us something very important about the Second World War. If World War I...
Damn! You don't have anything, you just make it out of nothing, you just synthesize it. That's genius. Way to go, America! And thank you for buying the mug. Who out of those who bought the mug were Americans. I wish if my store were going down I could synthesize more mugs or more orders, but I cannot do that. But Americans saved the day, as in the World War II. How the hell do you synthesize rubber? From oil? I think it's from oil, some oil sub-products.
One was the first truly industrial war, the first war where mass production and industrial capacity truly tipped the balance. World War II was the first scientific war, where things like radar, computing, and the atomic bomb would help to decide the world's fate. And not least among these scientific advances were synthetics. Without synthetics, the resource war may have been lost. And while the creation of synthetic forms of many natural resources may not get heralded the way that the radar or the jet engine do, it changed the war, and changed the world economy forever. So if you want to understand policy decisions in World War II, whether they be strategic or scientific, one good place to start is to follow the resources. I hope some of these episodes got you thinking in a new way about the Second World War. I know they're not our usual epic story fare, but we wanted to take this opportunity to talk about tactics, ideas, and policies that had a huge impact, but sometimes get glossed over in the grand scheme of things. This more or less concludes our discussion of resources in World War II, but as long as we're talking World War II, we wanted to take a closer look at the Battle of Britain, so we'll see you soon for that.
Hell yeah, I love these details, they're fun. Okay, this is a stupid question, but can't you synthesize oil? Probably not. No, because everything you synthesize almost comes out of oil. Plastic, rubber, and petroleum, diesel, all are oil products, so I guess you cannot synthesize oil. No. But we have one more video on this series, so be sure to come back on Wednesday. Today is Monday. But before we go on, you know, a letter came from United Kingdom, very much connected to the video. The Battle of Britain is the next video, but United Kingdom, and in the back it said Royal Mail. The sender didn't pay enough airmail postage on this item, so we had to divert it into an alternative service. Sorry if there was a delay. You tried to send me mail but you didn't pay for postage, so it took like I think 4 months to come. Well, doesn't matter, the mail came. If you want to send me mail, the address is here, I will feature it in the video. But now let's see what is in this one. I haven't gotten mail for like 2 months I think. This is Vilnius. This is... What the hell? This is Lithuania. Alright, well nice, I like Lithuania, but I thought it's from Great Britain. But I guess they didn't pay postage, so it went through Great Britain. So yeah, a Vilnius postcard with empty back.
Tere Artur! Recently I discovered your channel and I really enjoy your videos. During my holidays I have been to Lithuania and I got you a postcard.
Oh, so he went to Lithuania.
Hopefully you like it. Last year I have also been to Estonia and I absolutely loved my time there.
Very good. Everybody should love Estonia because it's so lovable.
Estonia is such an interesting country with a unique culture, and I also think that Estonian is one of the most beautiful languages in the world.
True, it is damn beautiful. I went to the song concourse, song festivals yesterday, choirs and duets, and I listened to the song. It was Estonian songs, but I listened to them and it's like, damn, this language is beautiful. What's your favorite place in Estonia? All of the countryside. What's your opinion on Estonian metal groups such as Metsadel? Metsadel is the bomb. They're on the top of Estonian metal. There's no one better than them, and they're actually doing the world tours also. Listen to them, they're hell yeah. I would say they make the true thing. True Estonian culture, pagan culture. From Nicole. Thank you, Nicole, from the letter. I didn't get if you're from Great Britain or from Lithuania, but I guess you're from England, so yeah. Buy the mug. Send me letters, support the channels on Patreon please, that would keep the channel afloat, as you did with the mugs. Now Patreon also needs a boost. Link is in the description below, and as always my friends, until my next video, stay cool and bye bye.